Woke up this morning, it was still dark. I went outside and didn't realize till I almost got in the car that my car was iced over. And we're only in February. We've already had 4 seasons this month. So get ready for some strange days probably to follow. Kind of a bittersweet day today. A couple of our members have moved back to the state of Washington. Hopefully and prayerfully they'll have a safe trip there, but we really do appreciate them being with us and being a part of our congregation for the last while. Also, we have taken a look at ourselves and over the last several months, the last year, it seems that we've lost a good number of our membership. People passing away. We'll have services this week of one of our members. People moving because of job opportunities and so forth. I would hope that this would not deter us. That we would continue to stand for what is right and what is true. That we will continue to defend the gospel. That we will continue to share the gospel with as many as possible. Our intent is to continue to, if we can, hopefully this lesson this morning and forward will go out continually on our Facebook page, and we do appreciate all of those that have followed along with us on that. Ask if you would to be getting your Bibles out with me this morning and turning with me to the book of Psalms, chapter 26. Psalms, chapter 26. I'd like to look at a few verses in just a moment, but to introduce the lesson this morning, just a couple of 3 weeks ago, February the 4th, I believe, was the airing date of it. President of the United States gave a State of the Union address. This is something that has been customary and dates back in our history for quite a while. The State of the Union address is for the reason and for the purpose of letting the country know where we are, where we stand currently, and what has brought us here through the past year. Well, I want us to look at that this morning a little bit, that thought and that ideal, and talk about the state of the church this morning. The state of the church. Where is the church? What kind of year has it been? What's brought us to where we are this morning? What is the condition of the church? Well, the church as a whole, it would be fairly easy to diagnose the status of the church. Unfortunately, the status of the church isn't what it once was. It's not as strong, it's not as large, it's not as forthgoing as it has been over the years. On the other hand, it's nowhere near as bleak as it was years even before that. So the status of the church overall is that it's holding its own, but it has a lot of room for improvement. Now, looking at the church locally, it is and would be very easy to think about things from a negative standpoint. As I said a moment ago, we've lost a lot of members over the last year or two. We've had a lot of folks to move away, and a lot of folks that have passed away even of our number, and others that are sick and unable to attend. And a great number is no longer here with us this morning that were here just a year ago. That's a negative, isn't it? Well, I would have you to understand that among the negative, the obvious, there are also a lot of positive things concerning the church locally over the last year or so. Just mentioning a few in part. We've had people to move away, but we've also, in that time span, have had people to move in and to join with us and to worship with us. That's a positive. Others deliberately made a conscious effort to come and to worship with the congregation here at Alma. That says something positive. As we mentioned just now, we started a Facebook page. A couple of those ladies that have just moved off that joined with us some time back helped and encouraged us to start a Facebook page for the church. It's been a good success, and a lot of people able to look at that and to share perhaps the only time that the truth without compromise of the Bible is ever heard. We created, whether it's a negative or a positive, I think in the long run it will absolutely be a positive. I think it helps for making the church more of a community. But we started a cemetery out back. We'll utilize that again this coming week, where members of this congregation, past and present, will have an opportunity, if they so choose, to be buried near the church where they attended. And I think that's a good thing. It's a sense of belonging. It's a sense of community. It's a sense of unity that the church should be presenting, and we're doing so. We've made contributions and support to various publications of the truth that go out not just to the world, but also to our own community. The House to House publication has been very popular. It's expensive. We as a small congregation can't afford to do a lot of things, but we're doing far more than larger congregations are doing. We've given support to the House to House publication, to the Voice of Truth publication. We get the books and have used and taken advantage of them. To the children's home over in Valdosta, Georgia, that help children who are displaced and have no families. For the In Search of the Lord's Way that comes on and is broadcast in our local community at least twice every Sunday. And on the things go. There's a lot of positive things that the church locally has and is doing. So when we look at the state of the church, and when we zero in and we look at the state of the congregation that we are at, there are a lot of positives. Let's not forget about the positives in spite of the negatives that are also present. I would dare challenge that you look around any church, any location. Ups and downs are probably the common thread of all churches in all places. But what we need to remember is that we need to maintain our good works. We should never get satisfied in well-doing. We should never get distraught when things don't go our way. Just two examples. We'll not read them, just give you as reference this morning. From the book of Titus chapter 2, verse 14 says in that passage that we should be zealous of good works. And then the next chapter over, chapter 3, verses 8, also verse 14, supporting, says that we need to continue in maintaining our good works. Continue to do what's right, even when things aren't going good. It's the thought that we see there in the writings from the book of Titus. Now, coming to our text for this morning, we see the psalmist David as he is speaking to the Lord. And this is not only a pledge, but a request that he is making to God. And he's going to ask God in this, as we look at the first 8 verses in a moment, to take a closer look at him. And David is not patting himself on the back. He's not congratulating himself for being such a great person. What he's trying to do is say, Lord, just take a look at my life. Take a look at my service. And see if you can find it in your heart to find me worthy. Let's read the verses, if you will. Beginning at verse 1 of Psalms 26, I'd like to read through verse 8. The King James Version says, Judge me, O Lord, for I have walked in mine integrity. I have trusted also in the Lord. Therefore I shall not slide. Examine me, O Lord, and prove me. Try my reins and my heart. For thy loving kindness is before mine eyes, and I have walked in the truth. I have not sat with vain persons, neither will I go in with dissemblers. I have hated the congregation of evildoers, and will not sit with the wicked. I will wash my hands in innocency. So will I compass after thine altar, O Lord, so that I may publish with the voice of thanksgiving and tell all thy wondrous works. Lord, I have loved the habitation of thy house, and the place where thine honor dwelleth, David says. David says here, first of all, his request is, verse 1, he says, Lord, judge me. Verse 2, he says, examine me. Take a look at me. He's saying here, vindicate me. Vindicate, in the essence, as David gives it here, is asking for God to forgive him of any shortcomings in his life. And to see and show that he is in a right standing before the Lord. Isn't that a request that all of God's people should be asking? God, take a look at me. You know, Paul, as he writes, and especially a couple of occasions in the book of Ephesians and elsewhere, he encourages us, he instructs us to examine ourselves. And we should look at ourselves, and we should see if we're doing what all we can do for the cause of Christ. But David says here, he says, God, take a look at me, and you judge me. You determine in your infinite wisdom. He also uses the word, notice here, your loving kindness. He could also say here, your tender mercies, couldn't he? Take a look at me, take a deep look at me, and see if I've done all that I can do to be the right kind of person that I ought to be. And this is my contention with you this morning. If we, like David, would take a look at ourselves and ask God to look at us, to judge us, to examine us, to prove us, to vindicate us, if we as individuals would do that, then we would grow. If we as individuals are growing and doing as we ought to do, then we as a congregation will grow. One always has a direct link to the other. I go back to the book of Acts chapter 2. The early church, and from the very first gospel sermon that was preached, when 3,000 souls were baptized into Christ and were added to the church by the Lord himself. The church, it says, at the latter part of the chapter there, they had a commonness, they had a oneness. It says in that daily, from house to house. Folks, we've got to first of all get our life right with God. We've got to be like-minded with other people, and we need to be fellowshipping with like-minded people so that we collectively and with the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace can continue to grow and to do well in spite of the sufferings and the setbacks and the afflictions of life. Now, I want us to look not just at David's request here, but I want us to spend the time this morning to look at for the reasons that David presents, that God should look at and see if truly he has done all that he could do. I want us to look at these reasons he offers here too. He offers 5 reasons. This is why I think I'm doing it right. Let's take a look at our lives. First of all, in verse 1, he says that he has walked with integrity. Now that word integrity is a big word. I'm not just talking about it's a lot of letters, but the word integrity means something. Integrity means, what does others think of you? What have others seen in you and in your life? What would be the first words they would offer if your name was brought up? You see, that's integrity. It's not just what we do, not just what we say, but it's how we live and how we treat others. I saw something on television the other day. I think Judge Mathis showed it, wasn't it? I said that'll preach right there. I might do a sermon in the near future on it. But he was talking about a woman that had been very kind to others that had fallen on their luck. And he says she's not just a Christian, but she's living her faith. And that's what it is that David's talking about here. He's saying, God, am I living my faith? Am I doing the things every day because I want to do them that is approving in your eyes? He says here, I walk with integrity. How about us? Would we invite God? Would we be willing for God to scrutinize our day-to-day walk? Do we want God truly to tell us what He thinks about us in our everyday life? What if God shadowed you for a day? You know, went with you wherever you went, saw the things you saw, heard the things you said, witnessed the things you did. What if God shadowed you for a day? Not a week, oh my. Just a day. Got news for you. He does. He does. Now, we may not want to know what God thinks about our integrity, but David had confidence. David didn't say, I think I did all right. He says, Lord, I have walked with integrity. I know that I have done what you would want me to do. But I want you to take a look. Now, I think too, knowing David at this stage of his life, that David would have welcomed and taken action had God said, you know, you've been doing pretty good here, but you got a little area over here that's a little fuzzy. You need to clean it up a little bit. And David would have took that as information to make him better. Not as criticism to bring him down or cause him anger. But David would have taken that in the spirit with which it was given. How many of us are willing to take criticism for the faults and the flaws in our life? How many of us, when someone says, well, you know, you really shouldn't be doing that, you really shouldn't be talking that way or going to those places or doing those things, how many of us get offended and get defensive and want to lash out and tell folks, mind your own business? You see, that's not where David was. David was like, Lord, I'm doing the best that I possibly can, but I want you to take a second look. He trusted God's judgment, didn't he? Not just God's information, not just God's telling him things, but God's judgment. He says as much, judge me, O Lord. Why? Because I've walked with integrity. And when he says in the King James Version, I have walked in mine integrity, he's not saying according to what I think. He's saying, I personally have walked with integrity. I have kept a check on myself. The second thing in verse 1 it says, and I have trusted in the Lord. I have trusted in the Lord. The word trust there is akin to the word faith. Do we have faith in God? And we would probably readily say, yeah, I believe in God. No, do you have faith? Do you trust God? Are you willing to say, I want God to lead my life? Not live my life, because I must do that, but lead my life. I want to follow where it is that He is willing to lead me. Do we truly trust God to go to those places that we are unsure of? To do those things that maybe is outside of our comfort zone? Are we willing truly to trust God with our life? I'll make a statement here, and I'm going to read it a couple of times so that you can hear it and let it sink in. Our salvation is not secured by our perfection, but by God's faithfulness. I'll say that again. Our salvation is not secured by our perfection, but by God's faithfulness. We can do the very best that we can do, and we still fall short. We can reach the level that's most possible for us individually towards perfection. I'm not talking about sinless perfection. I'm talking about spiritual maturity. That's the word perfection in the Bible. But we still need God's faithfulness. Hold your places there. I'd like to turn to the book of 1 Thessalonians, if you'll follow there with me. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, as Paul writes concerning that. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, I'd like to look at verses 23 and 24. Paul writes to the church there concerning us abstaining from the evils of life, and here's the reason. Verse 23, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly, completely. And I pray, God, your whole spirit and soul and body be preserved blameless until the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Listen, faithful is he that calleth you, who also will do it. God is faithful. He has promised to us, his people, that he will never leave us, that he will never forsake us, that he will always provide for us and protect us, that if we're faithful to him, that in return he will be faithful to us. And God has promised, as a faithful God, to those that are his, when this life gets troublesome, that he'll either A, give us a way of escape, or B, give us the strength to endure the troubles of life. And then ultimately, if we remain faithful unto death, Revelations 2:10, he will present to us that crown of life. How many of us trust God? Believe God in his righteousness? How many of us understand that even in our unrighteousness, that God is and always will be a righteous God? God is right for us and with us, even when we are not always right with him. Our perfection will not secure our salvation, but only God's righteousness will. Thirdly, coming back to our text in verse 3, he says, did David, that he walked in God's truth. Now there's a lot of folks today that are walking in truth. I'm pausing. I'm waiting. I'm letting you catch up with me. There's a lot of folks today, religious folks today, Bible-carrying people today, church-going people today, that absolutely are walking in truth, but not necessarily God's truth. You see, there's a difference. Notice David didn't say, I just walk in truth, or a truth, or some truth. I am walking in God's truth. There's a lot of religious-minded people today, church-going people today, carrying their Bibles with them. I guess not reading them, but carrying them with them, that are following the truths as presented by mankind. The ideology, the theology of mankind. People that need to tell them what else the Bible has. Well, God's Word is sufficient for us. Paul says that it will thoroughly furnish us to all good works. That it will help us to have the learning to do the things that we need to do. It'll help us to readily divide the words of truth so that we can apply those things to ourselves, to our life, to our time that need to be applied. But there are folks today that are following in the truths of man in the guise, the error, as being the truth of God. In order for us to follow the truth of God, we need to read and study and apply God's Word in our life. We need to quit being people, like Christ said, that are just hearers and not doers of the Word. There's a lot of hearers of the Word that go out and do what they want to do or what someone else instructs them to do. We need to be doing those things that God, through His Word, tells us that we should do. Then and only then can we truly say that we have walked in the truth of God. Turn with me to, just hold your place, we're going to come right back here, to the book of Acts. I'd like to look at an occasion of Paul as he's standing before the council. Acts chapter 23. Notice verse 1. And Paul, earnestly beholding the council, said, Men, brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God unto this day. How many of us this morning, if we were to stand before God Himself this very day, could say, I have lived in all good conscience. I followed the truth of God's Word. How many of us could do that? How many of us would have the courage and the confidence that David had and say, I follow God's truth? Not man's truth, not my truth, but I follow God's truth. And then, the fourth thing, we go back to our text, and in particular verses 4 and 5 of Psalms 26. Paul says that he has separated himself from the influence of the wicked. How many of us deliberately try to not keep company with those that could lead us astray? This is what Paul said to the church at Corinth. Notice the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul speaking in chapter 15, he says in verse 33, be not deceived. Don't kid yourself. Be not deceived. Evil communications, King James Version, corrupts good morals. When you hang around with folks that aren't following God, before you know it, you too will quit following God, and you'll start following after them. We have sayings that we've heard all our lives, birds of a feather flock together, and words like that, right? That's what it is he's talking about there. Others tend to have an influence on us, and sometimes we, in our own self-righteous minds and thinking, say, well, I'm going to hang around them so that I can influence them. Well, the next thing you know, something happened. The influence has been negative, and it's all been leading you in the wrong direction. We need to associate ourselves. The Bible says that we should love the brother. Love the brotherhood. That we should be with like-minded people. Now, I'm not saying that we have to or should alienate, because it's not possible. If we alienate ourselves from those that are of the world, outside of the church, understand any outside of the church is in the world. We sometimes forget that. Then we can't very well fulfill the commission that Christ gave us in both Matthew and in Mark, to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. So we understand that we have to go into the world. We have to go outside the church to preach the gospel. Even though I would contend too that there's a lot of times that those in the church need the gospel once again too. The Bible says sometimes we have a need, when we ought to be teachers ourselves, to be re-explained and expounded upon, which are the first principles of God. Galatians chapter 2, turn there with me if you would. Galatians chapter 2. Paul has heard some things about one of his brothers, the one that Christ called the rock, the stone, Peter, Cephas, Simon Bar-Jonah. Many would contend the first of the apostles. Well, he had an issue, Peter did. And Paul heard about it. You see, Peter was just fine going to his Gentile brethren. In fact, Peter was the first to take the gospel to the Gentiles. And he was fine associating with them and sitting down to a meal with them and having worship services with them. He was fine with all of that. But then, if some of his Jewish brethren came in, whether it was into the assembly, whether it was into just a general gathering, Peter would, whether it was on purpose or not, find himself disassociating with those Gentile brethren and only associating with those Jewish brethren. And Paul said, really? You're looking at them as Jew and Gentile, not as Christians? Let's read that. Verse 11 again, the book of Galatians chapter 2. But when Peter was come to Antioch, Paul speaking says, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles, but when they, he's talking about the Jews, were came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. Excuse me. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, intimates that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. Notice what it is that Paul's saying here. We can't be prejudiced and be Christians. Those words don't work together. We have to be united. We have to look at whether we're fellow Christians or not, regardless of our ethnicity, regardless of our gender, regardless of our whatever else in life it may be. Socio-economic background, none of that matters. If we are Christians, we are fellow Christians. It does not matter about other things. Paul told Simon Peter, says, you better get your act together, brother. I've seen and others have noticed that you associate only with the Jews when they're around. Do you think that your Christian brethren aren't the same as your Jewish brethren? We need to understand that there is no such thing as a color scheme in Christianity. We're all the same in God's eyes. It's whether we've been washed in the blood of the Lamb that matters, not where we were born or to whom we were born. And then the last thing in our text, chapter 26 and verse 8, David says that he loved to worship God. He loved to worship God. He said it, and he used the ideal in the adversary. He says, I love the habitation of thy house. How many of us love to worship God? I know there's some folks that love to go to church. I know there's a lot of folks that love to see and to be seen. That's not what I said. How many of us, like David, can truly say, I love to worship God? That same David said in the Psalms that I was glad when they said unto me, right? Let us go into the house of the Lord. How many of us look forward to the opportunity that we can assemble together and worship God in spirit and in truth, as Christ says, as John writes in the hymns? How many of us truly enjoy worshiping God? Now, there's a lot of folks that say, I enjoy worshiping God, but what they're doing is entertaining or being entertained. You know, entertaining and being entertained isn't worshiping God. I don't care how pretty someone sings. When we sing as a congregation, according to the example of the Bible, we sing congregationally as a group. We're not here in the entertainment business. We're not here to act the fool. We're not here to make promotions of things just simply to promote the gospel. That's who we are to be. How many of us truly love to worship God? Psalmist said in chapter 122 of Psalms, in the first verse, he says, I will lift up my eyes into the hills, which cometh my help. Well, I look to God. I don't look to man. I don't look to entertainment. I don't look to vices. You know, there's a lot of places you can step into a church, and it's a whole lot like going to a 3-ring circus. It's less than entertainment. It's a show. It's a great promotion. I see a lot of folks today, and me of all people, I ran a computer business for 30-something years. I understand about technology. I'm not against technology. Technology is a wonderful thing. But I see folks, of various places that church is a big promotion. You got to have all the big flashing lights and stuff in the background to get everybody's attention. You got to have all of the fancy programs going that present and show off and showcase different one's talents and abilities. Folks, we're the church. Our purpose here isn't to entertain one another. Our purpose is to worship a true and living God. That's who we are to be. And David said, I love to worship God. He didn't say I love to act a fool. I love to be entertained. He said, I love to worship God. Not everybody does. Not even all of God's people always did. Let me share one example with you. Look to the book of Malachi with me, the last book of the Old Testament. Malachi, the prophet, and arguably he says that he's one of the minor prophets. I would argue with that as well. I think all the prophets were major prophets. That's just me. But Malachi says in Malachi chapter 1 concerning Israel in verse 13, he says, and ye also said, behold, what a weariness is it. It's talking about Israel had a weariness in worshiping God. And ye have snuffed at it. You just kind of turn your nose up at it, saith the Lord of hosts. And ye brought that which was torn, and the lame, and the sick. Thus ye brought an offering Shall I accept this of your hand? Saith the Lord. What? They got sick and tired of worshiping God. They thought that going to worship God was a drudgery, that it was something that was a waste of their time. They would much rather be doing other things. They in their own minds were righteous enough without having to stop and take their precious time and go and assemble together and to worship God and make sacrifices. He said, so those of you who do come, when you come, you bring that which is lame and sick and broken and offer it. You think I'm going to accept that? Shall I accept these things, thus saith the Lord? You think I'm going to accept that? And we say, well, we don't bring things to offer and sacrifice on an altar today. Your worship before God, your attitude towards worship to God, your willingness, your eagerness to assemble together to worship God. All of these things are your lame and broken and vile sacrifices before God. And do you think God will accept them? Absolutely not. We must love to worship God. We must want to worship Him in spirit and in truth. We must anticipate and look forward and encourage others, Hebrews 10, verse 23 through 25. We must encourage others to worship. To encourage and remind them that there's a day coming that we will no longer be able to assemble together and worship. We must do our part in order for others to do their part. When we look at the state of the church today, this is what I want you to remember. The state of the church, globally, locally. The state of the church is no better than the state of its individual members. Are you willing for God to take a look at your life and judge you today? To find whether you've been faithful? Just because God's faithful doesn't mean that you don't have to be. But that should encourage us as well to be faithful. How do you stand before God today? What is not just the state of the church today, but what is the state of your life as God sees it today? As God judges it today? Because He does. This morning, if you're subject, we invite you, we encourage you. We offer the hymn as we stand together.